Hello, we will begin the third lecture on church history. In our last lecture, we learned about the fathers. The fathers include the apostolic fathers, the apologists, the Greek fathers, and the Latin fathers. We categorized the fathers into these groups. We talked about the first three, and today we will study the Latin fathers. 11. The Latin fathers. Number 1. Tertullian. If we look at his life, we learn that Tertullian was born in Carthage at around the year. His father was a centurion and his mother was a pagan. He became a believer at the age of 40. Let us summarize his views on faith. He believed in the doctrine of sin that said that the disobedience of Adam, the progenitor, was what caused the discord between God and man. He claimed that the soul is inherited from one's parents. He said that because sin is also inherited, it does not exist in the flesh. He is the creator of the idea of the Trinity. Tertullian was against infant baptism. Let us take a look at his life. He was born in Carthage in the year 200 to a wealthy family. He was a teacher of rhetoric, literature, and law. He became bishop of the Church of Carthage around the year 248. Persecution happened at around the year 250, and because of this persecution, Cyprian went to the desert and encouraged the church with his letters. Cyprian is famous for his ecclesiology. We will briefly cover his ecclesiology. Cyprian believed that salvation could only be found in the church. He said whoever abandons the church is an alien and an enemy. He said whoever does not call the church their mother cannot call God their father. He said that like the people who were outside of Noah's ark perished, those who are outside of the church will perish as well. He claimed that there was no other church apart from the Catholic Church. Because the church was raised through bishops, there is no church without bishops. He also argued that a divided church and a heretic's baptism are invalid. Therefore, he believed in the unity of the church, and he became the progenitor of the idea of the Catholic Church. Up until now, we have studied the four types of fathers. Let us compare these fathers. First, we have Clement. Clement was active from the year 92 to 101. As Bishop of Rome, he worked for the cooperation of churches. He wrote Second Clement and his book of sermons. Next, we have Ignatius. He is known to have died at around the year 110. He was bishop of the church of Antioch, and he wrote his 7 epistles while he was being transported to Rome. Next is Polycarp. Polycarp was bishop of the church of Smyrna. He was martyred in the year 155. He wrote a letter to the church of Philippi. Next, we have Papias. He is known to have died at around the year 150. He was bishop of the church of Hierapolis. He wrote in 5 books explanation of the Lord's discourses and a book on the millennium. Next is Hermas. Hermas was a disciple of Pio, bishop of Rome. He died at around the year 140. He wrote Shepherd of Hermas, which is about the end of days. Next is Justinus. Justinus lived from the year 100 to the 5. As a philosopher, he used philosophy to evangelize the West. He wrote the first apology, the second apology, and dialogue with Trypho. Our next figure is Tatianus. He lived from the year 110 to the year 172. He lived in Rome. Tatianus wrote Address to the Greeks and Diatessaron. Next, we have Irenaeus. Irenaeus was born in the year 155 and died in the year 202. He was Polycarp's disciple. Irenaeus wrote a book called Claims for the Church's Peace, and he contributed to Latin theology. Also wrote a book that was against heresies. Next is Clement. The first Clement is Clement of Rome, and now we are talking about Clement of Alexandria. He died in the year 213. He wrote Exhortation to the Greeks, Pedagogue, and the Stramata. Next, we have Origen. Origen was born in 185 and died in the year 254. He evangelized Arabia. He also founded a theology school in Caesarea. He wrote what is called Hexapla. He wrote an apologetic text on doctrine. Next is Tertullian. Tertullian Africa. He wrote the Apology. Finally, we have Cyprian. Cyprian lived from the year 200 to the year 258. He was Bishop of Carthage. He wrote 81 epistles for the unity of the church, and he organized rules for the church. 12. Heretics and sects. Number 1. Judaist heretics. 1. The Ebionites. The word Ebion means poor in Hebrew. The Ebionites rejected Paul's doctrine. They seem to only have used the gospel according to Matthew. Let me tell you about their doctrine. The Ebionites adhered to the law and practiced circumcision. They remembered the Sabbath and fasted. They interpreted the law literally. They denied the fact that Christ was born to a virgin. The Ebionites denied Christ's divinity and only acknowledged his human nature. They say the Lord was appointed as Messiah when he was baptized. Number 2. The Elkosites. The Elkosites said the following things. They said that Jesus was Adam who returned as a person, and they claimed that he can come again in the flesh. They performed circumcision, remembered the Sabbath, and fasted. Judaist heretics kept the law, remembered the Sabbath, and fasted. Number 3. Gnosticism. Gnosis means knowledge in Greek. This does not refer to knowledge of the Bible, but it refers to mysterious and supernatural knowledge. The people combined the popular astrology, magic, philosophy, and Persian dualistic cosmology with Christian doctrine to form a religious philosophy. Their doctrine is as follows. They denied the Judaist elements of the Old Testament. They did not acknowledge the reality of Jesus' bodily suffering and resurrection. Furthermore, they valued abstinence and leading a wandering life. They were interested in the following things. They contemplated why the universe that God created had sin and disaster. They also thought about how we are to be saved in this situation. Also, they did not look at the Old and New Testament Bible from a traditional theological perspective, but they interpreted it from their own perspective. They came up with the following answer. The deity flowed out as an eon and became distant from the deity to reach the lowest level. They said because of deity created the universe is imperfect. They further said the creator God of the Old Testament is a lower God. And they said Christ of the New Testament is the ultimate God. They stated Christ's body did not exist, but it only appeared to be that way. They said the following about redemption. The salvation of mankind is being freed from the bindings of material things and returning to God. They said that this is fulfilled through knowledge. As they did this, they categorized mankind into three groups. First, people. Next, there are spiritual people. Thirdly, there are psychic people. Number two, church sects. Church sects, claiming to be holy, separated themselves from the church. Montanism, Novatianism, and Donatism are sects. I will discuss them one by one. Number one, Montanism. Montanus of Phrygia founded Montanism at around the year 156. His doctrine was identical to that of Roman Catholicism. However, they advocated the revival of primitive Christianity and rejected Gnosticism. They abolished strict rules. They were also opposed to the system of ranks within the church. These people encouraged fasting and asceticism. They forbade the practice of remarrying and emphasized abstinence. Number two, Novatianism. Let me explain how this sect formed. The sect was created during the time of Emperor Decius. The church of this time period was persecuted, which produced many apostates. As persecution came to an end, people were divided as to how they were to deal with the apostates, how they were to let them return to the church. This, the bishops of the Roman Church and most of the bishops of the East and the West decided to be generous. In other words, they allowed people to return if they repented. However, Novatian strongly argued that they should keep the rules. The bishops of Rome held several meetings. They decided to dismiss Novatian and to accept apostates who repented. Number three, Donatism. Donatism was created for the same reason Novatianism was created. Followers of Donatism held the strong view that said they could not forgive those who abandoned the Bible during the church's mission. They claimed that a church with criminals had departed from God, and thus the criminals had to be expelled from the church. They also said that baptisms performed by these apostates are invalid. Number three, Manichaeism. This is paganism. Paganism looks similar to the church, but it is completely different. I will first talk about Manichaeism. Manichaeism is a religion that formed in the 3rd century in the east of the Roman Empire. Manichaeism had ideologies that were similar to those of Gnosticism. However, their roots are different. Influenced by Greek philosophy, while Manichaeism was influenced by Eastern religions. The ideas came from Eastern religions from Persia. This religion flowed into the West and came into contact with Christianity. It adopted elements of Christianity and formed a sect. The founder is Mani. For this reason, the sect is called Manichaeism. Mani was born in the year 216 and died in 276. He was the son of a Persian aristocrat. He said he received revelations from when he was 19 years old to when he was 24 years old. He traveled India, China, and had many followers. The Persian palace welcomed him. However, he was killed because of the hatred of his opponents. Let me tell you about its doctrine. Manichaeism is based on Persian dualism. They explained the world to be a field on which light battles darkness. They said that mankind was formed because the devil, which is a force of darkness, entered the world of light and created humankind. They claimed that nirvana was the only way life could return. They advocated abstinence in order to reach nirvana. Their ideology spread to many regions. It reached Mesopotamia, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain. This idea continued to spread until the 13th century. Number 13, the Bible and Creed. Number 1, the Bible. A. The compilation of the Bible. It is the process by which the Bible was canonized into 66 books. During its Sunday worship services, the early church read the collection of Jesus' sayings and doings. At around the year 160, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were compiled to form the four Gospels. Marcion the heretic included the Apostles' epistles, the Pauline epistles, in the compilation of the New Testament was completed during the time of Tertullian. B. The Muratorian fragment is proof that the New Testament is made of 27 books. In 1740, Italian historian Muratori discovered this. He discovered it in a library in Milano. The Muratorian fragment includes several books of the New Testament. It includes the four Gospels, Acts, the 13 Pauline epistles, Jude, 2nd John, and Revelation. C. The Peshitta. The Peshitta is a translated copy of the New Testament that was made in Edessa the 2nd century. It is a Syriac version of the Bible. We are talking about a translated copy of the Bible. The Peshitta allows us to see what translated Bibles were like before it was decided that the Old and New Testament Bible was to have 66 books. The Peshitta includes the following books of the New Testament: the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John; Acts, the 13 Pauline epistles, Hebrews, James, 2nd Peter, and 1st John; Jude, 1st Peter, 2nd and 3rd John were added to it. D. Let us take a look at canon. The canon, we Protestants know, consists of 66 books. We call it canon. The word comes from the Greek word canon. Canon means straight rod or reed. Today, we would call it a measuring ruler. The Greek word canon was used for the Bible to mean rules or quantity. The church started using canon to mean principles that define loving acts of faith. The New Testament was also referred to as canon until the time of Constantine the Great. When the Fathers spoke of canon, the New Testament was included in it. Thus, canon means standard, fundamental principles, and a list fundamental principles. The church councils decided that the 27 books of the New Testament that we have today are canon. Of course, we must remember that the church councils did not decide on the 27 books, but because the 27 books were naturally accepted as canon, the church councils established that only these 27 books are canonical. In the year 382, the Eastern Church decided at the Council of Rome that the 27 books form the New Testament canon. The Council of Carthage decided on the 27 books in the year 395. Then what was the standard for the New Testament books as canon? First, there is the historical standard. Do the writings have apostolic authority? Next is the internal standard. The standard is the influence the same as that of the apostles? Number 2, creed. The most representative creed is the Apostles' Creed. Legend has it that the 12 apostles wrote down the standards of their faith in Jerusalem, and Peter carried this creed to Rome, which became the Apostles' Creed. Back in this time, believers who were baptized, who were to be baptized, had to make this confession of faith. The fundamental why doctrine and creed came to exist was the emergence of heretics such as Arius. In response to these heretics, they created and used orthodox doctrine. The Apostles' Creed seems to have been confirmed during the Council of Constantinople in the year 381. Number 14, church government and church officers. Number 1, church government. A. The church's sovereignty. The sovereignty of the church was initially concentrated in large cities. The church's sovereignty became to be focused came to be focused in large cities because large cities had exceptional leaders. Furthermore, large cities were economically prosperous. The church said that as the organization for salvation, there was no salvation apart from the church. They also said that there was no church without bishops. B. Regional synods. Regional synods are similar to today's church presbyteries. Synods were centered on cities. At around the 4th century, they gathered in Carthage, Alexandria, Rome, Antioch, Galatia, Elberus, and Arles. Most of the presidents of the synods were bishops of large cities. If there was no bishop, then the senior person assumed that role. Number 2, officers of the church. Officers are people who serve in the church. Early on, bishops and elders were the only officers. In the middle of the 3rd century, there was one bishop and elders and deacons. From the second half of the 3rd century, the positions of office became subdivided to form ordained positions of bishops, elders, and deacons. B. Let me explain the rights of each of the officers. First, we have the Archbishop. The Archbishop supervises all the bishops in the region. He is responsible for ordination. He assembles the first council in 2 years, and he serves as president of the council. Next, we have pastors were mediators between God and man. Next, we have bishops. As the head of church government, bishops managed the administration, administered, delivered sermons, and participated in councils. Next, we have elders. Elders managed services and were responsible for ordinations. They also taught believers. Number 15, worship and sacraments. Number 1, worship. A. The place of worship. In the early days, worship was held at an individual's house, a rented house, or a church. After 200 AD, people worshipped in a special building. The church was made up of a main sanctuary and a on which the pastor stood. B. The details of worship. First, the people sing praise. From Psalms and Scripture, they sing in particular Isaiah chapter 6, Luke chapters 1 and 2, and Matthew chapter 21. Afterwards, they read the Scriptures. Of the Scriptures, they read the sayings and doings of Jesus written by the apostles and the writings of the prophets. The moderator delivered the sermon. Everyone stood up and prayed. Communion was held with bread and wine. Next, people gave offerings. The moderator managed offerings, and he used it for orphans, widows, the sick, and people who were undergoing hardship. Concludes the third